Good evening, gospel revolutionaries around the world. This is Michael Lilborn Williams coming to you from the bonus room above my sister's garage in Oak Ridge, Tennessee. I have to tell you, she gets a big kick out of that. I love telling her what my introduction is. Thank you guys for joining me tonight, and we're going to have another good time. We're going to be going back to the book of Galatians. And this book just keeps opening more and more and more to us all the time. We are going to go back to verse 14, and then we are going to complete through verse 18. These statements from Paul, the apostle, are just too powerful to skim over. We must look at them and look at them closely, because you see, there's been a perception that has been wrong for 2,000 years of what this is. Please remember that the concept, the subject of this whole letter, the entire letter was established in the very first part of it. And again, who it was about, who it was to, what they had done, and what the results of what they had done, those that were at fault, what the results have been. That's what the whole book is about. Now, if you have any hesitation to think that no, sometimes we go off subject and now we've forgot about circumcision. We've forgotten about the concision, which is the cutting group. We're not talking about them anymore. Just in case you think that, we are in chapter 5 and verse 14 through 18. But then Paul says all the way down, and we're in the last verses of chapter 6 and verse 12, and he says, as many as desire to make a fair show in the flesh, to make a fair show in the flesh. It's going to be important because, see, we take this out of context, so we've got to see that reading forward, this has a context. As many as desire to make a fair show in the flesh. What is in the flesh? It's when you're wanting to make a show. and that's not to make a show in the way that we think in the flesh. It's when the flesh wants to do a righteous performance of some nature to show that it is righteous. That's why he has dealt with circumcision throughout this book. That's why he has dealt with Peter, James, and John throughout this book, throughout this entire letter. But I also have to remind you again that Paul lost this battle. Paul lost this battle. Sad to say, but it is absolute truth that Paul lost this battle. That's why we have what we have out here that we're dealing with now in what is now called Christianity. Now, we're not saying a negative word about any Christian. Please let me add this to this teaching. Anytime you hear me speaking, I strive to say Christianity, not a Christian, because there's a lot of really good Christians. There's just because you're a Christian doesn't make you a bad person. Oh, man. But I tell you what, if you're going to be a really good Christian, you're going to have to tell a few lies because you don't measure up to the standard. You just don't. So you say, well, I go to a church that says we don't have to measure up to the standards. Well, then they need to explain just a little bit more to you. So as he has said here, jumping forward in chapter 6, verse 12, as many as desire to make a fair show in the flesh, they constrain you to be circumcised only lest they should suffer persecution for the cross. This is where Paul explains this. Now, I've jumped forward to chapter 6, but we're going back to chapter 5, verse 14 through, and you will see that this helps tie this together. I wanted you to see that this subject remains the same right to the last breaths of this letter. At the very end of this chapter 6, we are still in chapter 5, verse 14. But you see, being in the flesh is when the flesh, this has been so clarified here, I just had to jump forward because you see, Paul knew his subject and the people knew what his subject was also. But see, in our modern day Christianity, we have converted in the flesh to be something that is sex, drugs, rock and roll. To be in the flesh is to want something bad or something against the law, when being in the flesh is actually desiring to keep the law, which Paul also said is falling from grace. What is falling from grace? It's called being in the flesh. What is being in the flesh? When you're desirous to present yourself to God and to people as something that is worthy of acceptance from God and worthy of God to be on your side and favor you in some righteous element of our lives. So please understand that I've jumped forward here just a moment for your sake to show you that we're not twisting this around. When Paul's talking about being in the flesh, Paul is talking about desiring to do something to be righteous. The subject has been circumcision. You can apply it to any law whatsoever. But here he was comparing it. He was doing an exhaustive study on the issue of circumcision. So, as many as that desire to make a fair show in the flesh. So remember that. Being in the flesh is when you want to make a show. Being in the flesh is when you want to prove that you're righteous by your works. That's what being in the flesh is. It's not the counterwise to that we have been taught all of our lives. I felt it was necessary to drop back to verse 14. For all the law is fulfilled in one word, even in this: thou shalt love thy neighbor as thyself. I felt this deserved some clarification. If you are going to go by the law, now you see what Christians read this, everybody reads this and says, see, all you got to do is love. Well, you can't do it. That's the issue here. Paul, in his incredible way, has nailed us all to the wall. And to the cross is where he's wanting to get us all nailed to, so we'll realize we're dead and we've been raised with Christ. That's what he wants us to understand. But he has created a conundrum here that has said, for all the law is fulfilled in one word, even this: thou shalt love thy neighbor as thyself. Now, last week, I remember I told you, I said, you love your dog more than you do your neighbor. I think you love your blanket more than you love your neighbor. I know you love your furniture more than you love your neighbor, because if your neighbor got sick and needed money, you wouldn't sell all your furniture and give it to the family for money. You're just not going to do it. So you see, this is kind of like a statement like Jesus said, if you really want to keep the law, then this is how you do it. You're going around saying that you're keeping God's law, but I'm telling you, if you even think about anger, or if you think about lust, you've committed adultery and murder also. This is Paul's way of saying the same thing. If you're going to do it by the law, all the law is fulfilled in one statement: love your neighbor as yourself. That's as impossible as don't think about it. Oh, man. That's when you start talking about pink elephants with extra large eyeballs and ears that the elephant walks on, and then say, don't think about it. It's one of those cases. So what Paul has done is drawn our attention to this profound fact: you can't keep the law. If you did, it would all be fulfilled in this one statement: love your neighbor like you love yourself. It ain't going to happen. You can put all the pretense to that you want, but it is not going to happen. Even if you got good neighbors, what about the neighbors that you have that you don't even like? He says, but if you bite and devour one another, take heed that ye be not consumed one of another or destroyed. He said, if the issue of pursuing righteousness under the law isn't going to cause you to love your neighbor at all. It's going to cause you to bite and devour each other and destroy. You're going to destroy each other. It sounds like the condition the world is in. So what condition is the world in? It's under the law. I've told many of you before, all of you before, that my ultimate goal is to see this world at peace. But you see, right now we know that this world is not at peace. Why? There's only one reason this world is not at peace. It is because it is under God's law. Zip. That's it. Don't go looking for 1,000 other answers to all world peace. There's no need in looking for the answer to it, because Paul has made it very clear that under the law, you will destroy each other. That's what he said. One of the writers even said that the wars come from within you because of the law. It says, this I say. Now the term this is not there. He says, I say then. He said, now because of these two comments that I just made, he says, walk in the Spirit and you will not fulfill the lust of the flesh. Now, I jumped forward here just a moment just to solidify, before we went into this part of this teaching by Paul, what being in the flesh is according to this letter, according to this writer. What is the pursuit of the flesh, or being in the flesh? Being in the flesh is being under the law. It is trying to attain some favor with God, or turn away God's wrath, or whatever it may be, by keeping or not breaking a certain law. Do you know where the whole world is on this issue? They're all under the law. You'll hear it at Walmart. You'll hear it at Dairy Queen. You'll hear it at the finest palaces in Europe. You will hear it in Australia. You will hear it in New Zealand. You will hear it everywhere, this mindset, because Paul lost this battle. The whole world is under God's law. I know, I wish Paul would have won this battle also, but he didn't. That's why we are being as fervent as we are, because we think this battle that Paul put up, that we should see Paul win this battle in the long run. And I'm convinced Paul will win this battle in the long run. But you see, for us to clarify and help Paul to present this message, we've had to extract Paul out of Christianity. We've had to extract Paul out of the other gospel. He's the one that said that what Peter, James, and John were preaching was another gospel. It wasn't me. So we're trying to extract Paul out of here. Now, thank God we have Apollos, who is so far extracted out of what Christianity teaches. It's just amazing. And folks, we're still learning vast amounts about this ministry that this man had on this earth, in his ability to teach and write concerning the gospel. He says, walk in the Spirit. So what is a walk in the Spirit? Oh man, I'm trying to Shandai Bobo all I can. I'm trying to pray all I can. I'm trying to read all I can. I'm trying to worship and praise all I can. That's not a walk in the Spirit. Because if you think praise gets you closer to God, you're in the flesh. If you think prayer gets you closer to God, you're in the flesh. You are fulfilling the desires of the flesh when you pray. You are fulfilling the desires of the flesh when you worship. If you think that is creating an atmosphere for God to come and inhabit, you are in the flesh. Now, why are you excited again, Michael? Because it's so important. It's so important. That's why I'm excited. That's why it's hard for me to contain my words whenever, and my everything that's within me is hard to contain whenever I'm trying to address this subject. And in these few sentences here, Paul has made such a dramatic statement. For the flesh lusts against the Spirit. The desire to be under the law is lusting against the Spirit. The desire to be righteous through your deeds is a profound lust. What does the flesh want more than sex, drugs, rock and roll? What does the flesh want more than sex, drugs, rock and roll? What does the flesh want more than sex, drugs, rock and roll? It wants its own righteousness. And damn it, you won't keep it from me. That is the flesh. And that is the response you get when you talk to people who are in the flesh. Let me tell you something. You can preach against sex and drugs and rock and roll, and they'll all say hallelujah and praise the Lord, and then go out and do it in some form. At least in mind, they will be breaking the law according to the teachings of Jesus. And they won't be loving their neighbor as themselves either. And no, they're not believers because they're not doing the works of Christ, and they've not done any works greater than Christ. And they don't have any faith, so stop claiming it. Because Jesus said if you had faith as a grain of mustard seed, you'd be able to speak to this mountain and say, be plucked up by the roots and be cast in the sea, and it'd jump up out of the earth and fly to the sea. So don't tell me you're filled with faith. Don't tell me you are a believer. Don't tell me that you're not under the law when these things reign in our lives and we crave righteousness so much. Something other than the one Jesus gave us. God forbid we settle for the righteousness of Christ. God forbid we settle for that. For the flesh lusts against the spirit, and the spirit against the flesh. And these are contrary one to another, so that you cannot do the things that you would. He's not talking about you can't go out and commit murder and lust and all of this stuff. He's saying you cannot do what you wanted to do to try to obtain and retain and maintain your righteousness. You can't do that. This is a battle to the death. One of these two is going to win. And to this point in world history, the Spirit has not won. To this point in history, the Spirit that Paul preached about, the Spirit of righteousness, the Spirit of holiness, the Spirit of sanctification and redemption, the Spirit of salvation has not won. All of these subjects have become a sellable commodity to groups of people by the millions around the earth that they can profit off of. I'm sorry, I'm mad. I'm not sorry either. It's about time we got to a point to where that this bothers us to a great degree. Folks, I'm trying my best to share the gospel with you just to make it appealing, to make you just stop and think just a moment. But folks, there's a crisis on this planet, and the crisis is self-righteousness. The crisis is self-righteousness regardless of what religion you get into. But if you be led by the Spirit, you're not under the law. Do you see what just the opposite of Spirit is? The opposite of Spirit is being under the law. There's no need to get all spooky about it and say, I wonder what being in the Spirit is. You know, maybe it's getting in that moment where you're just captured and drawn away. No, that is not in the Spirit. That, if you think you're closer to God because of your worship, you are in the flesh. This is Michael Lilborn Williams from above my sister's garage in the bonus room in Oak Ridge, Tennessee. I'm saying these things because we in the Gospel Revolution, we love you and we want you to experience the free. We don't want you to be free. You are free. Jesus set you free. We can't set you free. You've been free. You just don't know it. All we're doing is greeting you to experience the freedom that Christ brought you into before you were ever born on this planet. We love you.